Tonight, we finally know what happened to missing Lafayette woman Ella Goodie. This after suspect Brandon Francisco pled guilty to federal charges. Francisco has also agreed to spend the rest of his life in prison. In return, the government has agreed not to seek the death penalty. I combed through the federal documents recounting Ella's last movements and moments alive with Francisco.
On March 9th, 2022, a mother of two teenagers left her home in Scott, Louisiana, thinking it was just another workday. She told her family she'd be back soon. She never came home, and what happened to her in those final hours would haunt her children, devastate her community, and leave investigators searching for answers that wouldn't come for over 2 years. But before we dive into this heartbreaking case, if you're new to Shadow Crime, this is where we dig deep into the cases that shake us to our core. Hit that like button, subscribe, and click that bell icon so you never miss when we bring you the truth behind these stories. Trust me, you're going to want to follow this one all the way through. Ella Goodie was 33 years old, living in the small town of Scott, Louisiana, about 60 miles west of Baton Rouge. She wasn't living some glamorous life. She was doing what so many of us do every single day, just try to make ends meet. Ella was a rideshare driver, working for apps like Uber and Lyft, picking up strangers and driving them wherever they needed to go. But here's the thing that a lot of people don't realize about gig work like this. The apps take their cut, sometimes a big cut. So Ella started doing what some drivers do when they need to make more money. She started taking clients off the app, direct rides where she could keep all the fare for herself. Now, I want you to think about that for a second. As a mother, she's trying to provide for her 2 teenage kids. She's working hard, probably long hours, picking up whoever needs a ride. And we all know that when you're doing rideshare work, you're essentially getting into a car with complete strangers. You're trusting that they're good people. You're trusting that you'll be safe. For Ella, that trust would cost her everything. On March 8th, 2022, Ella told her family and friends that she had a job lined up. She was going to drive someone to Houston, Texas the next day. It was a long drive, several hours from Louisiana to Houston, but it would be good money. Her passenger? A man named Brandon Jermaine Francisco. She didn't know him. He was just another client who needed a ride, just another fare, just another way to put food on the table for her kids. The next day, March 9th, Ella spoke with her brother around noon. She was on the road, heading to Houston to drop off her passenger. Everything seemed normal, just a regular conversation. But that phone call will be the last time her family would ever hear her voice. Her 2 teenage children weren't immediately worried when their mom didn't come home that night. Think about it from their perspective. Mom's a rideshare driver. Sometimes trips run long. Sometimes there's traffic. Sometimes clients ask for extra stops. They probably figured she'd walk through that door any minute, but she didn't. And by March 11th, when Ella still hadn't contacted anyone, her brother knew something was terribly wrong. He filed a missing person report with Louisiana State Police. Now here's where things get chilling. Remember how Ella told her brother she was heading to Houston? Well, traffic cameras picked up her black 2012 Audi Q5 on March 10th, just 12 hours after her last contact. But here's the twist. The car wasn't in Houston. It was spotted north of Dallas, and it was heading back toward Louisiana, back toward where she started. Does that make sense to you? Why would Ella drop someone off in Houston and then drive north toward Dallas before turning back? She wouldn't. Someone else was driving her car. Investigators immediately started tracking her cell phone. The last ping came from near Iowa, Louisiana. That's a small town in the southwestern part of the state, not far from the Texas border. Her phone went dark after that. No more signals. No more traces. It's like she just vanished into thin air. But let me tell you about the passenger she was driving that day, because his background is absolutely crucial to understanding this case. Brandon Jermaine Francisco wasn't just some random guy who needed a ride to Houston. This man had a violent criminal history that should make your skin crawl. Back in the early 2000s, he was convicted of attempting to murder his own wife. Let that sink in. His wife. He served 10 years in prison for that. And if you think that's bad, it gets worse. In 2018, there was another shooting incident involving Francisco in Rapides Parish. Another violent crime, another victim. And here's the kicker. On March 9th, 2022, the same day Ella disappeared, Francisco was supposed to appear in court in Rapides Parish for that 2018 case. He never showed up. Instead, he was in a car with Ella Goodie, heading to Houston. Or so that was the plan. By March 16th, just a week after Ella vanished, police publicly named Brandon Francisco as a person of interest. They put his face out there. They told the public they needed to find this man. And where you think he was? He wasn't in Louisiana. He wasn't in Texas. 9 days after Ella disappeared, on March 25th, Francisco was arrested all the way up in St. Joseph, Missouri. That's over 900 miles away from where Ella was last known to be. He was picked up on those unrelated charges from the 2018 case. But now investigators had him in custody. And they had questions. A lot of questions.
Tonight, we finally know what happened to missing Lafayette woman Ella Goodie. This after suspect Brandon Francisco pled guilty to federal charges. Francisco has also agreed to spend the rest of his life in prison. In return, the government has agreed not to seek the death penalty. I combed through the federal documents recounting Ella's last movements and moments alive with Francisco.
We don't have a body. We don't have anything.
After 3 years and 9 months, Ella's family have some answers. Brandon Francisco detailing to federal agents what happened on March 9th, 2022. That morning, he was supposed to appear in court in Rapides Parish for an attempted murder charge. He feared his bond would be revoked and he'd be put back in jail. So he fled. The plan, get to St. Joseph, Missouri, where he had friends. Francisco says he'd known Ella Goodie, a former Uber and Lyft driver, because she drove him before. Francisco asked Goodie to drive him there, but she said no because she had to be back home with her 2 children. They agreed on Houston, Texas. Francisco met Goodie in Lafayette in her black Audi in the very early morning. Francisco and Goodie check into a Houston hotel around 6:28 a.m. They check out a few hours later at 9:30 a.m. The two then head back towards Louisiana. Goodie stops in Lake Charles to meet a friend. Goodie's vehicle later flagged by Scott police in their investigation.
We know it's her vehicle. Due to the tinted windows, it's undetermined if she was driving or if anyone was with her at that time on March the 9th.
We know now that Goodie was with Francisco. After the stop in Lake Charles, Goodie and Francisco take off again on I-10. Near Iowa, Goodie and Francisco's cell phone activity stops for 51 minutes. It's this area that investigators later search.
This area right here is about a 50 square mile area, and within that area, there are specific areas they are targeting to try to locate evidence.
Francisco now telling federal investigators he took Goodie's vehicle through force. He took the firearm she kept in her vehicle for protection, shot her several times, disposed of her body, and fled in her car. After killing Ella, Francisco spent the night in Bedford, Texas. The next morning, he arrives at a friend's home in Missouri. 15 days later, he's arrested. Francisco has Goodie's firearm and key fob. He also admits to giving a false statement, blaming another man for killing Ella Goodie. 6 days later, Goodie's vehicle is found in Missouri, hidden at a home. The front passenger floorboard covered in blood. 2 bullet holes pierced the vehicle.
I mean, a vehicle is just an object, just a thing, but we'd rather find a person wherever she's at.
3 months after Goodie disappeared, investigators say this.
They are transitioning this actual missing person case to a homicide investigation.
Francisco initially pled not guilty to the federal charge against him of committing a carjacking resulting in death. But just recently, on October 29, 2025, Francisco changed that plea to guilty. He agreed to spend the rest of his life in prison. The federal court documents, however, make no mention of Goodie's body. Goodie's cousin, Jessica.
Every day we lived with this, and we continue to we can get Lala back where we want her.
The U.S. Attorney General and a federal judge must now accept Francisco's plea. His sentencing is set for January 27, 2026. It's important to note Francisco was facing charges in Rapides Parish before Ella Goodie's death for attempted murder. Francisco will no longer face those state charges or spend the rest of his days in Angola. He'll be remanded to a federal prison if his plea is accepted.
10 days after Francisco was arrested on April 4th, 2022, authorities found Ella's black Audi Q5. And guess where it was? St. Joseph, Missouri, the same city where Francisco had been arrested. Now you tell me, how does a missing woman's car end up in the exact same city where her last known passenger gets arrested? This wasn't a coincidence. This was a trail of evidence pointing directly at one person. But here's what was eating at investigators and absolutely destroying Ella's family. Where was Ella? They had her car. They had their suspect. But they didn't have her. On April 19th, multiple law enforcement agencies descended on an area in Jeff Davis Parish, near U.S. Highway 165. This was close to where her cell phone had last pinged back in March. They searched. They combed through the area. They were looking for any sign of Ella, any clue about what happened to her. They found nothing. Absolutely nothing. 2 weeks later, on May 3rd, 2022, Louisiana State Police made an announcement that confirmed what Ella's family had been dreading. This was no longer a missing person case. This was officially a homicide investigation. Ella Goodie was presumed dead. Can you imagine being her children and hearing that news? Your mom leaves for work one day and never comes home, and now police are telling you she's not coming back. Ever. Meanwhile, Francisco was still in custody, but not for Ella's case. Remember that 2018 shooting I mentioned? In October 2022, he pleaded guilty to attempted second-degree murder in that case and was sentenced to 30 years in prison. 30 years. But he still hadn't been charged with anything related to Ella's disappearance. Her family was watching this man get sentenced for hurting someone else while their Ella was still missing, and there was nothing they could do about it. Months turned into a year. By March 2023, the case was handed over to the Calcasieu Parish District Attorney's Office. GPS and cell phone records had tracked Ella's last known movements to that area near Iowa, Louisiana, in Calcasieu Parish. The DA was supposed to present the case to a grand jury. Finally, there was hope for charges, hope for justice. But then, something happened that crushes families in cases like this. Nothing, absolutely nothing. No indictment, no charges, no updates. 2023 came and went. Ella's family was stuck in this horrible limbo, wondering if their daughter, their sister, their mother would become just another cold case statistic. Just another file sitting in a drawer somewhere, while the man they believe killed her sat in prison for a completely different crime. They kept sharing her story on social media. They kept pleading for anyone with information to come forward. Ella's own mother was begging people across the country to keep sharing posts about the case, saying so many people don't even know who Ella is. And think about her 2 teenage kids during all of this. They're going through high school, dealing with all the normal teenage stuff, except their mom is gone and nobody can tell them what happened to her.
Case of Ella Goodie. Right now I'm in front of the federal courthouse in Lafayette, where a federal grand jury returned an indictment charging 38-year-old Brandon Francisco with carjacking, resulting in the death of Ella Goodie. Francisco has been a person of interest in the case since early on in the investigation. Ella was last seen on March 9th of 2022. The indictment alleges that on that day, Francisco took Ella's 2012 Audi Q5 by force, violence, and intimidation, resulting in her death. It also alleges he knowingly used and discharged a handgun. Now, this homicide investigation was turned over to the Calcasieu Parish District Attorney's Office about a year ago. We reached out to them for a response. They tell us, quote, "We have been in constant contact with the federal prosecutors to determine the best path forward. As far as developments in Calcasieu on this case, we have not determined the charges for Mr. Francisco as the case is still being reviewed," end quote. Goodie, a rideshare driver, was allegedly driving Francisco to Houston, Texas before her disappearance. 16 days later, on March 25th, Francisco was arrested in St. Joseph, Missouri on an outstanding warrant in another case. Goodie's car was also found by the police in Missouri, but still to this day, no sign of Goodie. She was 32 at the time she vanished and the mother of 2 young teens. We spoke to Goodie's cousin Jessica in March of this year, marking 2 years since her disappearance. She told us then her family was still trying to keep hope alive.
Just imagine if it was your family. How can you continue to want to live or to even go on with not having to know anything or to look at her children every time and you have no answers for them.
The indictment also charges Francisco with 1 count of using a firearm during the commission of a crime of violence, 1 count of possession of a firearm by a convicted felon, and 1 count of flight to avoid prosecution. If convicted, Francisco faces a sentence of up to life in prison. He's currently serving 30 years at Angola after pleading guilty in a separate case to attempted second-degree murder in connection to a shooting.
Then came November 2024, 2 years and 8 months after Ella vanished. Her family had almost given up hope that justice would ever come. But on November 21st, 2024, a federal grand jury in Lafayette returned an indictment that changed everything. Brandon Jermaine Francisco was officially charged with carjacking resulting in the death of Ella Goodie. They also hit him with using a firearm during a crime of violence, possession of a firearm by a convicted felon, and flight to avoid prosecution. Finally, after all this time, he was being held accountable for what happened to Ella. But what happened next shocked everyone, even the investigators who had spent years building this case. Just days before that indictment was made public, on November 13th, Francisco did something almost no one expected. He pleaded guilty. In federal court, this 39-year-old man admitted to everything. He confessed that he shot Ella Goodie multiple times. He admitted that he disposed of her body. He admitted that he stole her car and fled across state lines. A binding plea agreement means he faces mandatory life in prison. His sentencing is scheduled for January 27th, 2026. You'd think this would bring Ella's family some sense of closure, right? The man who killed their loved one confessed. He's going to prison for the rest of his life. Justice served. But when Ella's cousin heard the news, she said something that just breaks your heart. She thought she'd feel stronger, more relieved. Instead, she said it broke her down even more. Because yes, they finally had the indictment, they had the guilty plea, they had the conviction. But they still don't have Ella. Her body has never been found. Francisco admitted to disposing of it, but he hasn't told anyone where. Somewhere out there in Louisiana, in Texas, in Missouri, or somewhere along that route, Ella Goodie is still missing. Her children can't visit a grave. Her mother can't lay flowers at a final resting place. They can't have a proper funeral. They can't say goodbye. The family is literally begging Francisco to tell them where she is. They're saying, Brandon, say something, anything for children's sake. Those 2 teenagers deserve to bring their mother home. So let me ask you this, and I want you to really think about it. What kind of person takes a mother away from her children and then refuses to tell them where she is? What goes through someone's mind when they're sitting in a prison cell, knowing they're never getting out, and they still won't give a grieving family the one thing that could bring them peace? Is it power? Is it cruelty? Is it shame? What makes someone hold on to that final secret when they've already admitted to crime? And here's another question that should bother all of us. How many other rideshare drivers, delivery drivers, or gig workers are out there right now, getting into cars with strangers, just trying to make money to feed their families, without really knowing who these people are? Ella trusted that this was just another fare, just another job. She had no idea she was driving with a man who had already tried to kill his wife, who had been involved in another shooting, who was violent enough to take her life. If this case has shown us anything, it's that evil doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just needs a ride to Houston. If Ella's story has moved you, if you think her children deserve to bring their mother home, do me a favor. Share this video. Share her name. Share her face. Someone out there might know something. Someone might have seen something back in March 2022. And if you want to stay updated on cases like this, cases where we fight for the victims who can't fight for themselves, subscribe to Shadow Crime. Hit that notification bell. And drop a comment below telling us what you think should happen next in this case. Should Francisco be pressured to reveal where Ella is? What would you do if this was your family? Ella Goodie deserves to be found. Her children deserve to say goodbye to their mother. Let's make sure her name is never forgotten.